Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar, Legislative and Regulatory Update, What Your Business Needs to Know, featuring special guest representative Darin LaHood. Welcome to the webinar. We're thrilled you're here. I'm your host, Hannah Oates, and on behalf of ISSA, I welcome you. We'll go over a few housekeeping items before we get started today. You have the ability to ask questions available to you in your question box, available to you on screen. You'll be able to type questions in there throughout the presentation that we will be able to monitor. Please note that we will have a couple of opportunities to ask questions today. About 30-40 minutes into the presentation, you'll have the ability to address our panelists, John and Laurie. And then at the end of the presentation, there will be a special opportunity to ask questions to Congressman LaHood. And now for our presenters. We have with us today John Nothdurft. John Nothdurft was hired as ISSA's Director of Government Affairs in January 2019. He brings more than 13 years of experience working in government affairs, public policy, and advocacy at the federal and state levels to ISSA. He monitors federal and state legislation and regulations for purposes of identifying, analyzing, and tracking issues such as cleaning product ingredient disclosure, hazard communication, disinfectant registration, occupational safety and health, and general business issues such as healthcare, taxation, and labor-related matters for ISSA. John is also working on rebuilding ISSA's grassroots advocacy efforts by fostering membership involvement in the political process. We also have with us today Laurie Flanagan. Laurie Ann Flanagan is Executive Vice President at DCLRS with over 20 years of experience in the federal, legislative, and regulatory process. She is a trusted advisor and strategist at DCLRS with expertise in a variety of issues including energy, labor and immigration, pesticides and fertilizers, small businesses, and water policy. In addition to lobbying government officials, Laurie assists with clients with strategic government relations planning. She advises clients on upcoming regulatory and legislative initiatives that could impact their businesses and helps them understand the steps needed to ensure successful advocacy efforts. And last but not least, our special guest representative, Darin LaHood, who introduced the bipartisan Clean Start Back to Work tax credit. Congressman Darin LaHood serves the constituents of the 18th District of Illinois, sworn into the U.S. House of Representatives on September 17, 2015. The 18th District spans 19 counties across central and west central Illinois. LaHood serves close to 700,000 constituents. LaHood's record throughout his public service has promoted economic development and fiscal responsibility. LaHood has been an outspoken advocate for creating a better business climate in Illinois to boost the state and national economy. LaHood currently serves on the House Ways and Means Committee. The Ways and Means Committee is the House's oldest committee and has jurisdiction over all taxation, trade and tariffs, and other revenue-raising measures. He serves on the Ways and Means subcommittees on tax policy and oversight. And with that, John, the presentation is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We've been regularly doing these webinars about once a month, and it's been great to see all the desire and just interest in our advocacy efforts. It's been a whirlwind last few months, dealing with obviously all the legislative and regulatory events surrounding the COVID-19 crisis, as well as pitching forward on the future and what the cleaning industry's role in that, in shaping public policy and health policy. I wanted to start out just with a quick disclaimer. Obviously, we try to make every attempt to ensure accuracy and reliability of the information, but a lot of these measures are fluid. A lot of the things going on, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. Things have calmed down a slight bit since the last few packages of stimulus have passed, but this is an ever-evolving, legislative and regulatory issue. So things change on a daily and sometimes hourly basis. So just kind of putting that out there. Obviously, we are here to try to give you the best and most up-to-date information And so we appreciate you understanding. So I'm going to just very quickly, I know some of you have already heard this spiel, but I want to talk a little bit about ISSA's advocacy efforts, and I'm going to pitch it over to Laurie to talk about, what's going on in Congress and what things are looking like. The goal of ISSA's advocacy efforts is to create a regulatory and legislative environment that allows the worldwide cleaning industry to thrive. We are the only organization advocating for policies on behalf of the entire cleaning industry, from those who manufacture products, chemicals, equipment, to distributors, down to manufacturers reps, to those who do the frontline cleaning in hotels, hospitals, your homes, and all across the board. So we want to thank all of our great members who are part of that critical and essential supply chain. Without you, we would not exist, and we would not be able to be as effective as we have been over the last few months of advocating on behalf of the cleaning industry. So thank you so much to each and every one of you. Very quickly, I know some of you have seen the screen before, but I think I did update it a little bit. This is kind of our expansion of our advocacy efforts. I started in January of 2019, and we were pretty bare bones. And the board of directors said, hey, we really need to invest in our advocacy efforts so that we could be more effective of fighting for public policies and regulatory environment that would allow the worldwide cleaning industry to thrive. So we've been doing a lot of work on that just this year. Here's a couple kind of highlights. One, I wanted to mention, we are developing a government affairs committee. We are seeking nominations for that committee. So if you or someone, whether it's a C-suite level or a government affairs personnel or really anyone that you believe inside your organization or company is interested in learning more about that committee, please reach out to me. We're actively researching and trying to get people to represent the entire cleaning industry. So having, there's very limited seats, but it's something we definitely want to try to get off the ground in the summer. We also launched our Cleaning is Essential campaign, which generated more than 11,000 messages. We were able to get the cleaning industry into the federal guidance. Most states followed those guidances, so we were able to keep the majority of the cleaning industry supply chain open and working as an essential business. We also launched our Clean Start initiative, which we'll get into a little bit more. We had announced our Clean Advocacy Summit in Flanagan, which was postponed, but we hope to come back next year and have a bigger and better event for all of you to come and meet with your congressional offices. So we've continued to work and lobby and educate policymakers about ISSA and the importance of the cleaning industry. And lastly, you'll be hearing more about this in the future. We're in the process of rolling out our ISSA Advocacy Funds. This is really a way to show your investment in our efforts so that we have the right tools and are able to go out there and make a difference on behalf of the key issues that we are some of which we will highlight today. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Laurie Flanagan, which I know Hannah gave a great introduction for her. She works for DCLRS, which has been ISSA's federal lobbyist for a number of years and has done really great work on behalf of us. And so she's going to get into a little bit about what's going on in DC. So with further ado, Laurie, take it away.
Great, thank you, John. Just a couple of highlights of just where we are in the political process before we talk about any issues. Obviously, if you turn on the news, you know that we are coming into an election year, presidential election, congressional elections, and any policies going forward. And the closer we get to November, the more partisan things become, the more things become about election politics. I think there's a couple of issues that will dominate and are dominating the news right now that will continue to be key issues going into the election, and the only real issues that will get any attention other than Congress trying to do work on annual spending bills to fund the federal government. Those issues are continued response to COVID-19 and the economic recovery. some efforts around criminal justice reform and the Black Lives Matter movement, and then some issues around immigration that we've seen play out in the last couple of days. On the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are with COVID-19 and the next stimulus bill. John and Congressman LaHood will talk about this in a little bit greater detail. But as you know, Congress passed a couple of stimulus bills that were outlined in the last couple of webinars. The biggest one was the last bill, the third stimulus bill, the CARES Act, which included the Paycheck Protection Program and a lot of other assistance and additional unemployment benefits and other things. There's still a desire in Congress to do one last stimulus bill, but the conversations are really slow and partisan. So with the CARES Act, for example, we saw congressional Democrats working with Senate Republicans and the administration to come up with a deal that eventually merged into the CARES Act. What we've seen this time around is a couple weeks ago, the House passed its stimulus bill. The Senate's kind of waiting and see. There's conversations around potentially doing a stimulus bill in either late July or early August before Congress goes on recess, and also during that recess are the Democratic and Republican conventions, or maybe doing something in September. All of this is still kind of emerging. There is an effort and a thought on a lot of Republicans of we should wait and see how the stimulus funds that have already been released, what they have done in terms of the economic recovery, where there are needs. Democrats have been pushing for issues which are further extensions of unemployment benefits, additional funding for state and local governments. We expect to see those play out in the next stimulus bill. There's also conversations around additional stimulus payments to individuals, liability protection for businesses so that if their customers or their workers contract COVID-19, there's some liability protection for the individual business, hazard pay for frontline workers, including not only medical workers, but those grocery workers and other essential workers. And what we hope will be a big part of that conversation that John and Congressman will talk about a little bit later is our Clean Start credit. And then there's just two other issues I really wanted to touch on before I turn this back over to John. So the one issue that we see continue to play out in election politics and with the president is the issue of immigration. Back in April, the president issued a proclamation that was a 60-day suspension of immigrants coming into this country. So folks seeking permanent residency. There were some exemptions for medical workers and folks that are considered in the national interest, but it really was a restriction on new immigration into the United States for 60 days with a mandate that restriction be reviewed periodically. That proclamation also asked the Departments of Homeland Security and Labor and State to look at existing worker programs and come up with ways to make sure that the needs of U.S. workers are being protected. And in issuing these proclamations, the president really talked about the high unemployment and why do we need immigrant workers or any kind of immigrants? They're just taking American jobs. And that's the bent by which he issued these proclamations. And then just earlier this week, the president issued a proclamation suspending the entry of a lot of the temporary workers. So the H-1B workers, which are your high-tech workers, the H-2B workers, which are your seasonal non-agricultural workers, J visa holders or tend to be cultural exchanges. You see a lot of J workers in hospitality and L visas. And this requires no new issuance of visas in these categories through the end of this calendar year, although there are some exemptions for medical workers and those working in the food supply chain, or if there's a determination that they'll be in the natural interest. Like the earlier proclamation, it requires that these restrictions be reviewed in 30 days and then every 60 days thereafter. And one last thing in the immigration realm that I didn't put on the slide, but we should mention is the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision recently held up the DACA program. It said that the Department of Homeland Security cannot restrict DACA, and that decision was based on procedural things and the way that the president's efforts to not renew DACA status for the Dreamers was done on a procedural basis. So these issues we will see play out as we go into the elections, and with continued unemployment, you'll see challenges to immigrant workers, efforts on restrictions. The president said that he still wants to eliminate DACA. So we're watching all of these issues closely for all of our members. And then finally, the last thing I'd just like to touch on quickly is trade. We know tariffs and the trade war with China really had a lot of impact on our members. The phase 1 China trade agreement has kind of put the escalation of those tariffs on hold, although existing tariffs did stay in place. There was a desire to negotiate a phase 2 China agreement, but we're seeing a little less resolve on that and some continued dialogue about the phase 1 implementation over Chinese activities in Hong Kong, over the president's feeling that China was not transparent with the status of coronavirus patients. We're just seeing a lot of hostilities, and with the economic recession, is China living up to all of its agreements on agricultural purchases and other things? So we're watching that closely for all of our members. We know trade and tariffs are a big deal. We also are watching the continued implementation of the US-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement that replaced NAFTA. And one of the things just want to highlight is we've seen the Mexican Environmental Ministry proposing some restrictions on pesticide imports. And while these have generally been on products that are used in the agricultural crop protection space, there is a real kind of effort in the Mexican Environmental Ministry to move towards the precautionary principle with an anti-pesticide bent. So for our formulator members that make sanitizers and disinfectants, we are watching this closely. And then finally, the US and the UK are continuing to have talks with the goal of trying to get a trade agreement, a bilateral trade agreement between the two countries by the end of the year, but whether they can reach an agreement or not still remains to be seen. So those are just a couple of the issues that we thought may be top of mind to all of our members. We're watching them closely. We will keep you updated. And with that, I'll turn it back to John.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie, for that quick update. Yeah, so there's, as Laurie kind of laid out, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of uncertainty. I think just a lot of moving parts, especially in election year. This is not your normal election year because usually there's not a pandemic going along as well, but it is kind of interesting times, and we continue to try to track a lot of various issues from a lot of different aspects. Obviously, some are more pertinent to our frontline cleaners, and some are more pertinent to our formulators. So just kind of putting that out there. One that I know is of interest is EPA and FDA regulations and policies for disinfectants and sanitizers. This continues to be something that we've been engaging with regulators on, as well as policymakers. FDA has done some things to relax some of the requirements on say hand sanitizers, and EPA has done something similar on disinfectants. I saw that there's a bill from Senator Thune from South Dakota to extend those FDA loosening of ethanol sanitizer regulations to a couple years out. We're still looking at some of the legislation and what that would look like for our industry, but just wanted to point that out as we kind of think about some of these different issues. Like I said, there's a lot of different issues. There's stress on the supply chain, especially for disinfectants and sanitizers, but also other cleaners, as well as other types of cleaning products. We see this, and I think there's going to be increased demand as we see the country reopen. There's a lot more requirements. There's a lot more guidance coming from OSHA, CDC, and other regulatory, and even states and localities for usage of these products. So obviously, if a city mandates the usage of something a certain amount of times a day, that's going to increase demand over maybe where it would have normally have been. So We anticipate there will be some stress on the supply chain, product shortages possibly. We've already seen that. I know our members specifically have been working hard. I mean, we have members who are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to try to churn out some of these critical products. So I know, you know, I'm very confident that they'll be able to do a lot of those things. And I know we're working with EPA, FDA, and the administration to try to make sure that they are able to do those things, whether it's dealing with you know, a lack of alcohol to use in some of these products, or, you know, being able to swap out certain inert chemicals easily. So I think the EPA has been, and FDA have done a really good job to help the supply chain. But I think regardless, the demand is going to be very strong, at least in the next near future, and probably through the winter. And then who knows where it goes from there. But that is something we continue to track and talk about with regulators and policymakers. Couple other things, I kind of piggyback on some of the things that Laurie was talking about, federal issues related to COVID. She mentioned some of them. Obviously, getting critical designation of cleaning and sanitation being deemed essential was important, critical to stay open. Supply chain issues, which I mentioned, CDC guidance, OSHA policy, and to kind of put in here one other thing is states and localities. One of the things we've been facing is a lot of states and localities are coming up with their own guidance. Sometimes it's specifically for an industry. We were talking with Washington State, and they had specific guidance for house cleaners and things they had to follow. But then also, you know, hotels, hospitals, business, office buildings, those as well. Just to give one example of something that we've been keeping an eye on and been weighing in on is San Francisco, for instance. They're expected to vote on possibly regulations for the hotel and office space. One of the things they had was, you know, lobbies and kind of general public areas would have to be disinfected every 30 minutes. I don't have to talk too much to explain why, you know, that might not even be possible, and it would potentially be harmful. So I think we want to make sure to get out ahead of some of these patchwork quilt of guidance that states and localities are kind of doing on their own, and be able to go to them and say, hey, this is really the best practices. Yes, we need to have enhanced sanitation and cleaning practices, but it needs to be done with being science-backed and using, you know, the right products in the right environment. As you all know, cleaning and disinfecting a home is different than a hospital, is different than a school, which is different than an office building. There's some general best practices across those, but they are different animals, and I don't think a lot of policymakers quite yet understand that. So we're continuing to work with policymakers all across the country on kind of that sort of productive engagement. A couple other things, liability related issues, huge issue for the industry. I've heard it loud and clear, and we've been weighing in both through the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and many other industry folks who are leading the charge on this. So we definitely believe there should be a federal liability related solution. Right now, there are quite a few states that are going in different ways related to this. You know, whether it's protections or possibly giving some more liability to the businesses themselves. So we're continuing to look at that and push forward as being a priority issue for us. A couple other things, you know, there's in the HEROES Act, which I won't get into too far, and even the original CARES Act, they added $600 per week for unemployment. And I heard from a lot of, especially our frontline cleaners, that, you know, there was a lot of employees who, you know, they were leaving to, you know, they wanted to go on unemployment because, quite frankly, they were making very good money by not having to work, and that sort of incentive structure. And while we didn't necessarily weigh in directly on that, there are some proposals to try to get folks back to work and offering some type of incentives. I'll get into a little bit more details of that, a couple potential solutions to that problem. Also, the ERTC and PPP enhancements, I think that's going to be part of the next stimulus plan, what that looks like, whether it's additional money for PPP, lifting some of the guardrails on that, or what that may look like. We're continuing to engage policymakers. And then obviously our Clean Start Back to Work tax credit, which I'll talk about a little bit, and then obviously have the congressman talk about that towards the end and some of the other things he's working on. So thus far, we've had 3 major laws created since March, and a 4th in development. The House passed a HEROES Act as kind of the starting place. The Senate has yet to formally announce anything. I think there's a lot of proposals, many of which are on this screen that are being discussed. And so we continue to track that and see where that goes. Laurie knows as well as I do that the timeline for when this could happen seems to be changing. Originally, probably a month ago, I would have said it would have already happened by now, or we'd be really close to it. I think criminal justice reform taking a front seat, which is a very important issue, has kind of taken some of the wind out of that sail. And I think the Senate wants to move a lot more cautiously in terms of what a next package looks like. Because I think one thing that is kind of in the background is no one knows if there's going to be a quote second wave or what the winter is going to look like. So I think there's a lot of discussion over when and what is the right policies and how large it should be. So we're continuing to figure out what that looks like as well. So I'm going to talk about 3 specific proposals that we have come out in support of. The first one is the Jumpstarting Our Businesses Success Credit, or the Jobs Credit Act. This is sponsored by Stephanie Murphy, who is also a co-sponsor of our Clean Tax Credit, and Representative John Katko. It would basically improve the employee retention tax credit. So if you've already applied, if you're already getting that, this would basically be able to tweak that and help it become more usable for many of the members who have taken advantage of it. It would expand the qualified wages to 60% of qualified wages to 80%. It would increase the per employee limitation from 10,000 to 15,000 per calendar quarter, and allow employers with more than 20% decline in gross receipts to be eligible for a portion of the credit. So it was kind of a sliding scale to, if you weren't doing quite as bad as some of companies, but you're still not doing great, you would be eligible for some portion of the credit. And I think probably even more importantly is the improved coordination between the ERTC and Paycheck Protection Program, so that employers could be eligible for both programs, but making sure that there's not, double dipping and those types of things. So I think giving more flexibility is really key, and we're very supportive of this measure. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the return to work bonus to help attract workers. This is sponsored by Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, and a similar idea has actually already been introduced or in place in Idaho at the state level. And basically it would incentivize those who are in unemployment, whether it's for whatever reason. And so I mentioned that right now, if you are unemployment until July 31st, at least currently, you get that extra $600 in addition to your normal state unemployment, which is a significant sum of money. So as we start to reopen the economy, I know some of our cleaning contractors and house cleaners and everyone, even manufacturers, are struggling to try to recruit, retain, and attract workers who are on unemployment, because unless you're going to make significantly more than that, there is a kind of a cliff, if you will, in terms of benefits. So this proposal would give $450 a week for individuals returning to work. So you would receive your own wages. So let's say you make $15 an hour, you would on top of that get $450 a week for a period of time, so that there is that incentive to come back to work. As I mentioned, people on unemployment are currently receiving an additional $600 a week. There were some reports out there that 60% of the workforce possibly don't even make that much. They're making more on unemployment than they were making working. So that is obviously a disincentive to work. And we obviously want to see incentives so that our cleaning companies can rehire, recruit, the critical frontline employees needed to fight the spread of coronavirus. Hiring and retaining employees has always been difficult. It's something that's always been a major pain point for the industry, not finding enough employees, and we believe this would go a long way into at least getting those employees back into the workplace in a safe and incentivize them to do so. I'm going to get into a couple different things. The last thing I did want to talk about is kind of generally what comes next. We are working to educate elected officials on the value of clean as states relax stay-at-home orders. I mentioned a lot of the issues that are going around the next stimulus bill. We are asking White House and the Congress to include our Clean Start Back to Work tax credit. And as I mentioned, continued reforms to ERTC, PPP, keeping the supply chain open, and encouraging government and business to invest in cleaning, which we believe is critical to getting us through this pandemic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the Clean Start tax credit. I know I've talked to you, many of you already on this, but I think it's important to kind of update everyone about the nuts and bolts of it and kind of where we stand. And then a little bit later, after our Q&A period, Congressman LaHood will come on and talk a little bit more about, why he supported it, why it's important, and kind of the feeling on Capitol Hill revolving around that bill. But simply, it creates a tax credit program available to businesses to offset the cost of properly training staff, buying cleaning and disinfectant products, or outsourcing that cleaning to a third party, a contract cleaner, cleaning company, to do it in the right way to help further prevent infections. Right now, the way that it's written in the House, it's a 50% tax credit up to $25,000 per location, with a cap of $250,000 per business entity. So if you are a franchise owner who owns, 6 McDonald's, that would equate to, $200,000, or I guess that would be $150,000 that you would be eligible to deduct or take a tax credit against your tax amount at the end of the year. So we believe this is a really interesting and great way to go about this. We've seen significant support across the aisle and across industries. So, let's say you are a cleaning company. How do you benefit from this? Well, one, we believe this will incentivize companies and businesses to do the right thing, utilize our cleaning contractors, as well as buy more product to clean and disinfect. It also applies to PPE. So if you're a cleaning company and you're spending, maybe a couple $1,000 a week or $100 a week on PPE, you're able to buy that for your employees and allow them, and then deduct that off your bill, your tax bill at the end of the year or in future years. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of it. As I mentioned, this is a little bit more about kind of what it would happen. So I see this helping the industry in two ways: driving demand, which I think is already there, but also helping our customers. So hotels, hospitals, all those various groups, business entities of doing the right thing, and whether they don't have the expertise and need to go out and find a qualified company to do that, we want them to do that. Or if they want to train their own in-house staff to do it, that's great as well. We really just want to get the word out about how to use these products correctly. A little update on where we are, just kind of broadly, and how we got to where we are. The bill was introduced June 1st by Congressman LaHood and Stephanie Murphy, so it was bipartisan. We were very happy with that. We actually just added another sponsor this morning, which is Adrian Smith from Nebraska, which was he's also on the Ways and Means Committee. So we're continuing to have this dialogue and add sponsors as we move forward. So, and that's a great, that's only because of the support of our members. We've had more than 2,700 messages from more than 500 members and a whole host of other groups sending messages to Congress saying, we want you to support this. This is critical. This needs to be part of the next package. And we've actually seen a lot of other groups, the American Action Forum, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who used to be the director of the CBO, just yesterday or earlier this week, came out basically sponsoring or supporting, endorsing a similar proposal. We had a hearing last week in the Ways and Means Committee where this proposal was discussed significantly on both sides of the aisle and by the panelists. So we continue to see a lot of support for this, and it just continues to grow. Where we are still working with the Senate to find a sponsor for companion legislation. Obviously, that's where I think our members can be influential. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Florida, they all have members on this committee, and I think we are hoping to get a leader on the Senate Finance Committee to really take this and move it forward. So, all your messages, all your phone calls, any personal relationships you have with senators, we would appreciate you letting us know and weighing in on this very important issue to help both Representative LaHood and Murphy push this forward. They are working hard on the House side as we are as well. And just to kind of show, this is not necessarily even about the cleaning industry or ISSA. We have now more than 20 groups signed on. Everyone from the NRA, which is the National Restaurant Association, to the Hotel and Lodging Association, to BOMA, BSCAI, the National Association of Convenience Stores, Travel Association. We also have the theater owners. We have Independent Music Venues Association. So it's across the board. There is just so much pent-up demand and desire for doing the right thing and making sure that once we reopen the company, the country, that not only workers are safe, which I think is number one for all of us. We want to make sure that workers are safe when they're going into their workplace, but also customers. If you're restaurant, you want every person coming through your door, sitting on your patio, to feel like, hey, I am safe here, right? They have done everything in their power to make sure that this is a safe environment for me and all the other patrons. And that has really resonated. We really have gotten quite a bit of support. Like I said, bipartisan support. No, I don't think I've heard, and I'm not blowing smoke, I don't think I have heard anyone say, no, that makes no sense. We do not need to do that. I think they all, everyone I've spoken to has generally agreed that this is good policy. And something needs to be done. It's just more of a, what does this look like? We believe we have the right solution. We are not so stubborn that if it's comes under a different name or looks slightly different, that we wouldn't support it, because we would. The biggest, quite frankly, the biggest pushback we've received is that it's not big enough. But obviously we have to weigh that, right? We have to weigh, is it large enough to have an impact with, is it politically viable, and can we get something that actually moves in legislation? Because you could have the greatest policy ever and it does all these great things, but if it doesn't actually move forward, then maybe you should have taken that smaller, more narrowly focused tax credit rather than trying to go for the whole enchilada. So we continue to weigh those things, and obviously our feedback from members is critical in that, and from our coalition partners as well. Like I said, we're going to take questions here in a couple minutes, and then we'll have Congressman LaHood. He'll be on with us in probably about a few minutes here. I did want to give you 3 things that you can do. One thing is, tell your elected officials that you support the Clean Tax Start Back to Work tax credit. If you've already sent an email, call your senators, send another email. Just continue to keep that drumbeat. It's critically important for them to hear from you all. Also, you can sign up to become an advocate for clean. I believe we'll probably put in the link in the notes. It's just issa.com/take-action. You can find all our updated alerts and all of those types of things as well. And lastly, we'll invite you to invest in our ISSA Action Fund, which we'll be rolling out here in the next couple of weeks. So be alert to that, and we'll give you more information as that gets unveiled. With that, I think, Hannah, I think we're ready to take a few more questions while we wait on the congressman to join us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John and Laurie, for a very thoughtful presentation so far. Starting off with some questions, we have one that says, Are there liability concerns with training and education as it pertains to COVID and to cleaning in general? Should cleaning organizations, FSPs, and distributors have errors and omissions coverage to protect against possible poor outcomes that customers attribute to insufficient training?
Well, I'll jump in on the first part. I don't know how much Laurie knows about some of the other aspects of it, but I will say this. I think getting trained or certified by a qualified third party, whether that's ISSA, which we'd love for you to do, or a qualified entity, I think that is very helpful in being able to defend your practice. We've had a lot of companies, businesses come to us and wanting us to kind of certify their practices as best practices. Nothing, I mean, I'm not a lawyer by trade, but nothing's going to fully, limit your exposure to zero. It just is what it is. There's always going to be lawsuits and those types of things. But I think you can do things to put yourself in a good perspective in terms of saying, hey, I am certified. I've done training. This is my record. So while I don't know about specific liability concerns, and we will kind of share that internally with our general counsel and others to see if we have a more specific answer on that second part, but I think you have to do your due diligence and make sure that you're operating in the right way. And I know many of our most all of our members are. Obviously, I know we've heard that there are some new companies that are popping up that may be new to the industry and don't have the years of expertise, and that's a concern. But obviously, I think we want to make sure that everyone out there operating, especially if they're under the ISSA brand, that they're doing it the right way.
And the only thing I would add is, EPA, in terms of the products you use, has the list N where it is registering products on an expedited basis because they are seen as effective against COVID. And we've seen some, and as an industry have supported some EPA actions against companies that are making claims that are really not supported by the regulatory process and the registration and efficacy data. So one of the other things too, in terms of the products that folks use, is continuing to steer them to products that have been recognized and registered with US EPA to meet efficacy guidelines is helpful. And the other thing I just add is I can't make any advice on the insurance and liability, but liability protections for businesses is really part of the conversation that John really went into a lot of detail about around what might be in the next stimulus bill, because it's the retail stores and the grocers and others where there's frontline exposure with the public. They really want some of the protections from liability, from lawsuits from their own workforce and also from their customers. So we may see some additional protections put in a law and a stimulus bill. Ultimately, it is definitely part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, both of you. Our next question is, what is the current status of the Paycheck Protection Program? Are applications still being accepted for this program?
Sure, so I can jump in. So there are some changes to the Paycheck Protection Program that just became law recently that did extend the time period by which you can calculate the benefits and allowed a little bit less of the benefits to be required in terms of loan forgiveness. You had to have 75% going towards payroll. Those were changed to 60%. So applications are still open for the Paycheck Protection Program. As John mentioned, that could be additional changes could be part of another stimulus package. But the law that the president signed recently also helped because it extended the period by which businesses can use those loan funds and reduce the amount of funds that have to be used specifically for payroll for forgiveness.
Thank you. Our next question here, this is probably more for John. Why should my new business contribute to ISSA's new advocacy fund?
Well, we'll be rolling out a little bit more of the details of why that's important, but this has been kind of uncharted territories, and quite frankly, we weren't budgeting for a pandemic, and we are a smaller shop, and we're trying to make sure that we can get some of these important um, pieces of legislation over the next step, over the finish line. So that's really important to us. Like I said, we understand people are struggling, and obviously anything that you guys can do to help is obviously very important. So we'll send more details about kind of specifics, and there are some benefits listed with various levels. So we're hoping, and we know that there will be many in the industry who step up and help us with those, but it'll go towards a lot of different things. But I believe Congressman LaHood might be on the line now.
I am, John. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate that. I know you have a very busy schedule, so really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks so much, John and Hannah and your entire team and everybody on the call. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. I was on for a few minutes there, John, just before I joined, and got to listen a little bit of your update on the Clean Start piece of legislation. And for those of you that are on the call, I'm Congressman Darin LaHood. I represent a district in central Illinois. So Peoria, Illinois is my hometown. I represent 19 counties across central, west central Illinois, and I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. And I couldn't be prouder to introduce this piece of legislation and to work with all of you on the call, and obviously ISSA and Stephanie Murphy, my Democrat colleague, also on the Ways and Means Committee from Florida. We think the legislation makes a lot of sense in terms of our response to COVID. As everybody knows on the call, we have appropriated and allocated over $3 trillion through the CARES Act and a number of other pieces of legislation in response to COVID, to address many different things on the health side and also on the economic side. And as we move forward to the next round of stimulus, which I anticipate we won't vote on till the middle to the end of July, maybe the last thing we vote on at the end of July. But when we look at what businesses are struggling with, and when I look at my district, as we continue to deal with COVID, the biggest issue obviously is making sure that the cleaning requirements, sanitation, deep cleaning where it's required, that those issues are addressed. And so when we got together, and by the way, I should say I have a number of cleaning businesses in my district that have large operations across multiple states. And so I understand it from the perspective of businesses in my own district. And so we think this legislation will be very beneficial to businesses as they begin to transition and opening up, giving them that tax benefit to incentivize them to engage in the cleaning process that needs to be done. And the legislation, as John may have mentioned, is temporary. We hope, obviously, we have a vaccine or a treatment or a cure sometime in the next year here. But for now, we have to deal with the ramifications of COVID. And liability is a big issue. And separate from our bill, we have to make sure liability protection is part of the next stimulus package. That particularly for small, medium-sized businesses, but for schools and every entity, because the last thing businesses that want to worry about is being sued by a personal injury attorney or having to deal with litigation related to this. So that really is a red line for us moving forward. And we think, obviously, our bill coincides with that. Again, the cost associated with this cleaning, which is at a whole nother level than anybody anticipated before COVID hit. But we have seen where that cleaning is done, where the guidelines are abided by, and where the implementation is done. That's going to help with stopping and preventing the spread of COVID. And so we are working hard to gain co-sponsors to continue to educate our colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats in the House, to do that. And I would just urge, and I know John mentioned this to you, to contact your elected officials, your senators and your House members, and ask them to co-sponsor our bill and work towards getting this passed. We anticipate that, and by the way, we have not heard any negative comments or any concerns. If anything, what some have said is it's too small. You need to go bigger. Obviously, we are focused on small and medium-sized businesses. We have not included nonprofits. We haven't included a number of others, but we think it makes sense. We think we've structured it the right way, and obviously will be beneficial for again, we'll go back to what are we looking at in a stimulus bill? We want to help out the health care crisis that we're in and also the economic crisis. And I think our bill serves both of those purposes. So, John, I know I mentioned a lot there, but happy to open up for questions, or I'm happy to talk further about the timeline and schedule or anything else that you may have.
No, that's really great. I know Hannah. I'm sure we've been getting some questions that we can pitch your way. I guess one of the things I know that well, first off, just want to thank you on behalf of the association and really taking the lead on this. It's been great. You've been such a great supporter of this, and really can't thank you enough on behalf of our 9,300 members across the country and across the world. So it's just been really great to hear that. So really want to thank you first off. I know one thing that Laurie brought up that you were probably not on the call for, but I know you're very engaged on the trade issues, especially with China and tariffs. Can you maybe give us an update? I know that's an issue of passion for you. That's also of very interest to our members.
Sure, John. I currently serve as the co-chair of the U.S.-China Working Group in the House of Representatives. That's a bipartisan working group that deals with issues related to China. Separately from that, our Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, just appointed me to a separate China task force that is focused on issues post-COVID. And so we are working diligently, myself and 14 other members, on coming up with a comprehensive plan on how we deal with China. Obviously, with COVID, there is a lot of interest in really going after China and holding them accountable for good reason, I should say. The lack of transparency as related to what happened in Wuhan and the virus, the deceitfulness on behalf of the Chinese has caused many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to be extremely frustrated and really interested in going after China. So what does that mean? John, we are up to, I think, 350 pieces of legislation and resolutions that have been introduced in the House and the Senate going after China. A lot of that deals with supply chains. A lot of that deals with decoupling. I think what we've seen in COVID over the last 3 months is the vulnerability of the U.S., our vulnerability when it comes to generic drugs, when it comes to PPE, when it comes to pharmaceuticals. We are heavily reliant on China. Now, as you may know, these supply chains are complicated, they're nuanced, they're intricate. A lot of them involve third parties. So I mentioned that only because I think the immediate reaction to a lot of members of Congress is, oh, we're just going to pull back from China and bring everything back. Well, that's easier, I think, said than done. It's a complicated issue. So our China task force is focused on, if we are going to do that, how do you do that? What is the cost to the U.S. taxpayer, or how do you incentivize doing that? You mentioned tariffs and other issues or other mechanisms that potentially could be used. Of course, we have a phase 1 deal too, John, that's separate from all this. That went into effect on February 14th. That's the trade deal that President Trump signed. I was at the White House. I worked extensively on that. And that is in place right now. So China has an obligation and a responsibility to buy upwards to $200 billion in products between now and the end of the year. About 60 billion of that is agriculture commodities, many of them from my district in central and west central Illinois. And so the trading relationship with China is important. It's important for our economy, whether it's ag or other industries, particularly in manufacturing. And so I think it's a delicate balance that we're in right now. But in Congress, again, there is a palpable adversarial relationship building against China. So I think when we think about the future, I think it would be a mistake to pull the plug on the phase 1 deal. But let's remember how we got to phase 1 with China. This administration implemented tariffs. They implemented tariffs over the last 2 years. We were essentially in a tariff war with China. And again, I'm not generally a fan of tariffs. I think tariffs are taxes. They're taxes on consumers and businesses. But this administration, I think, used tariffs in an effective way to bring the Chinese to the table, to negotiate a deal. We'll see if it holds up and see if China abides by what they've said they're going to do. They have had a history of not doing that. So again, I think we have to be careful about getting back into a tariff war, whether it's with China or others around the world. I think that hurts us long term. And again, I think that's those are taxes that are again paid by taxpayers in this country. But I think we're in uncharted waters right now when it comes to China. A lot will depend on how China responds to COVID. Thus far, they have not been very forthcoming. I think we're waiting to see whether that changes at all moving forward. But there's a lot on the plate. And by the way, our task force also is dealing with issues related to competitiveness, related to espionage, related to 5 and 6G, and Huawei and technology issues. And so there's a lot of issues on the table right now with China. I would not say we have crossed into a Cold War mentality, although I think there are some that want to do that. But we are in a very, tricky relationship with China right now. And we got to make sure that we make the right decisions moving forward for the country. So that's a long answer to your question, John.
Thank you so much, Congressman LaHood. This is Hannah from ISSA here. I'm very, very thankful that you're here, but we have a couple of questions for you. If you're okay with that, we can just jump right into those.
Sure.
Okay, so this one's kind of a multiple question in one. And it says, how would the Clean Start tax credit help my cleaning business? What is the current status of this proposal, and what can I do to help increase the likelihood of the proposal being included in the next federal stimulus bill?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I think taking the last part first, I think obviously building a coalition, getting, in Congress, obviously I'm one of 435 representatives, and Stephanie Murphy's obviously one of the group that we serve with. So, I mean, and people on the call know this, and I know Hannah and John know it. I mean, members of Congress are busy. They have their own priorities, and so what we've been doing is educating members. And obviously, members of Congress listen to their constituency. So wherever you're at around the country, talk directly to your member of Congress, schedule a meeting, talk to their staff, talk to your U.S. senators about the importance and what this means. To the first part of your question, what does this mean for your business? Obviously, as the country continues to open back up, cleaning, sanitation, all of these requirements are going to be a huge part of businesses coming back into business. And so if you're a cleaning business, obviously it's going to be beneficial to you. This will incentivize, again, companies across the board, across this country, to take advantage of the tax credit, so they can get a little break on what they're doing. In some cases, a lot of a break, but they're going to have to hire companies and that are involved in cleaning to do a lot of that. Some of that they'll be able to do on their own, depending on the size and the scope of the business. But listen, this is going to be with us for a while here, and so it helps out obviously your cleaning business, because you're going to have more of it. And secondly, incentivizes people to contact your businesses, because they're going to be getting a tax break to do that. Some businesses may not be able to open up unless they have the ability to have this tax credit to help them get through this. Again, it incentivizes and helps with those kind of dual purposes that our stimulus bills have dealt with, which is the healthcare crisis and the economic crisis.
Thank you so much. We have another question here for you. And it says, in researching the Clean Start Back to Works tax credit, it states that in order to qualify, the cleaning service provider must be certified. For a service provider to be certified, they need an industry recognized certificate in custodial cleaning or cleaning management by a qualified third party. What certification are they requiring, or what do you recommend?
I don't know the specifics on that. I mean, listen, I know in the state of Illinois, we have a state authorization for that, or a certification. My understanding is every state is different in terms of that. So again, I'd have to have Ashley on my staff, or maybe the Ways and Means staff, get some clarification. So happy to follow up on that in terms of what is the threshold or what are the requirements on the certification. I would assume if you're certified in your particular state, wherever you're domiciled at as a cleaning company, that would qualify. But we can follow up on that, Hannah.
Yeah, let me just, if you don't mind, Hannah, I'll just kind of dovetail into that. The way that, at least my interpretation of the legislation, which I think was crafted very well by LaHood's office and Ways and Means, is that it's broad enough to where it incentivizes and encourages those to get proper training to how to use some of these chemicals and products, but also not overly burdensome to where it's, you know, this huge mandate, right? So, you know, obviously, if you're already ISSA certified, or maybe you have your own internal training and certification process, those would generally qualify under this. So, you know, it's intended to incentivize kind of increased training and certification, but it's not necessarily, you know, preclude you from doing the cleaning, if that makes any sense. So.
Thank you so much to Congressman Darin LaHood for joining us today, for John Nothdurft and Laurie Flanagan of ISSA and DCLRS for an amazing and informative presentation. What a treat for our audience to hear from the Congressman today. I want to thank all of our attendees for participating and asking questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to the ISSA staff if you have any additional questions on these topics. We're more than happy to get back to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thank you so much, Congressman LaHood, for your time today. We're very, very thankful to have you. And with that, we want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. Until next time.